The morning air was still. Washington hadn't fully woken up yet. The sky carried that soft gray-blue shade that exists only minutes before sunrise. A few staff members hurried toward the government building's side entrance, coffee in hand, badges clipped neatly to their jackets. And near the steps, a man stood alone. No security detail. No press. No polished convoy waiting at the curb. Just a simple dark jacket. Hands folded loosely in front of him. Calm. Observant. He wasn't trying to look important. In fact, he looked like someone who might have taken the wrong turn while walking through the city. Two uniformed officers noticed him lingering near a restricted access point. They approached, professional, alert, cautious. "Sir, this entrance is for authorized personnel only," one of them said. "Do you have clearance to be here?" The man met their eyes. Respectful. Steady. "I understand," he replied softly. No argument. No frustration. No sudden movement. The officers exchanged a glance. "Do you have identification?" He reached into his jacket slowly, but before he could fully explain, a radio call interrupted the moment. A supervisor requested verification. Protocol tightened. Within minutes, the situation shifted from simple questioning to formal procedure. "Sir, we're going to need you to step aside." He nodded again. Passers-by began to notice. A quiet tension formed in the air, not dramatic, not chaotic, but uncertain. The man didn't resist. He didn't raise his voice to defend himself. He didn't say the words that would have instantly changed everything. Instead, he allowed the process to continue. Because sometimes, how people treat you when they think you're nobody tells you everything. What no one standing there realized was that this wasn't a random trespassing case, at least not in this fictional story. And what happened next wasn't about status. It was about character. Backhand index pointing right. What would you do if you had the power to correct someone, but chose patience instead? In this fictional tale, the man standing outside the government building was Keanu Reeves, but not as the world usually knows him. Here, he had recently taken on a new role in public service, stepping into a position where he could influence change quietly and thoughtfully. He wasn't a career politician. He didn't seek headlines, awards, or recognition. In this story, his focus was simple: understanding people, systems, and the small ways leadership touches everyday lives. Unlike most public figures, he rarely announced his visits. He didn't issue statements or set up photo opportunities. The world would have expected red carpets, flashing cameras, and formal introductions. But he wanted none of that. He believed that true leadership isn't about appearances, titles, or even authority. It's about seeing things as they really are, unfiltered, unpolished, and human. Keanu had spent years supporting charitable causes quietly. He had shown generosity not to gain praise but to understand the challenges ordinary people face. And this morning, he wanted to witness something that can be hard to measure: the day-to-day interactions between citizens and those entrusted to serve them. Arriving early, before anyone could notice him, he walked the streets in silence. No entourage. No press. Just his own presence. To the casual observer, he could have been anyone: a visitor, a passerby, someone with a purpose only he knew. Inside the building, people were already beginning their routines. Staff members checked documents, greeted colleagues, and carried out the quiet rhythm of work. Meetings were being prepared. Discussions about budgets, programs, and initiatives were underway. None of them knew a visitor, someone who would later cause surprise, was observing from outside. In this fictional story, his choice to appear in this simple way was deliberate. He wanted to see what happens when people are met with rules and expectations without the influence of status. How are questions answered? How are concerns treated? How is respect given, or withheld, when no one knows who the person truly is? Even before the officers approached him, he had decided how he would act: calmly, patiently, without expectation. He understood that sometimes the most powerful moments of leadership happen not when a person speaks loudly, but when they allow others to act according to their own judgment first, and then respond with insight and empathy. He believed in humility as a tool of leadership, not as a facade, but as a principle. To him, influence was not measured by how many people recognized him, but by how effectively he could observe, learn, and guide change quietly, thoughtfully, and respectfully. That morning, the city streets witnessed the calm before the small storm. Not the kind that makes headlines for conflict, but the kind that reveals truth. When a man of character enters a system, what will the system reveal about itself? And so, he waited. Patient. Observant. Ready to turn what could have been a misunderstanding into a lesson, not for revenge, but for reflection. Because sometimes, the most important stories begin not with power, but with presence. The morning had started quietly, almost invisibly. The city moved around him, busy with errands, meetings, and the small ordinary dramas of daily life. And yet, the man standing outside the government building, Keanu Reeves, in this fictional story, was quietly about to become the center of attention. 2 uniformed officers had noticed him lingering near a restricted entrance. Their training told them to approach, politely but firmly, to ensure protocol was followed. "Sir, this area is restricted," one officer said. "Do you have clearance?" He looked up. Calm eyes, steady posture. "I understand," he said softly. That simple acknowledgement, respectful but non-assertive, seemed almost too quiet for the bustling environment. Officers are trained to respond when compliance is uncertain. They asked for identification. He began to reach into his jacket. A simple act, a natural gesture. Then a radio call came through, requesting verification from a supervisor. What had been a calm, contained interaction started to shift toward official procedure. Moments that could have passed unnoticed were now becoming formalized. Within minutes, the man was politely escorted aside. Not roughly, not aggressively, but according to protocol. A small crowd of curious bystanders had gathered, watching silently from a distance. Whispers filled the air. Who is he? Why is he being asked to step aside? Inside the building, staff continued their work, unaware of the unfolding situation. Meetings were being set, documents were being signed, emails sent. The rhythm of routine carried on, completely disconnected from the brief disruption at the entrance. The officers did what they were trained to do. They followed rules. They made assumptions based on appearance and behavior, not realizing who stood before them. And yet, in that moment, no one acted with malice. No one intended harm. This was a story about protocol meeting patience, not conflict. The man did not argue. He did not demand special treatment. He did not flash credentials, despite having them. He simply allowed the process to unfold, quietly observing. His calm presence contrasted with the tension around him, but it also created a space for reflection, for everyone involved to notice that leadership is not always about asserting power. And then came the small moments that mattered most, a nod of understanding to the officers, a soft smile that did not mock, a quiet patience that silently communicated, "I see this. I respect your duty." Even in misunderstanding, there was humanity. Even in protocol, there was room for reflection. Even when assumptions were made, the man's restraint spoke louder than any words could. This fictional story illustrates how quickly a situation can escalate when appearances are misread, and how gracefully it can be diffused when patience, humility, and observation guide a response. It is a moment that could have ended with frustration or embarrassment. Instead, it became a lesson. Not in punishment, not in shame, but in awareness. How do we treat someone we do not yet understand? How do we lead when no one knows who we are? The officers were following rules. The man was quietly observing. And in that space between protocol and patience, the stage was set for a revelation that would surprise everyone. A revelation not about authority, but about character. And that revelation, when it came, would change the way everyone saw the morning, the building, and the quiet man who had chosen to arrive simply, without announcement, without title, and without expectation. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, though in reality it was less than 10. The morning sun was climbing, spilling pale light across the steps of the government building. The officers remained professional, their movements deliberate, their questions polite but firm. Their training guided them, procedures mattered. But even in their methodical approach, something unusual had begun to stir. The man standing there, Keanu Reeves, in this fictional story, maintained an unusual stillness. His calm demeanor was neither arrogant nor fearful. It was a quiet authority, the kind that does not need badges, titles, or recognition. He allowed the officers to do their work, answered questions honestly, and did not demand immediate resolution. He simply observed. A supervisor arrived, notified by radio, stepping briskly through the building doors. He glanced at the situation, took in the gathered crowd, and asked for identification. The man complied, reaching slowly into his jacket to retrieve a simple credential card. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. Just proof of who he was in a professional context. The moment of verification was subtle, almost unnoticeable to those who weren't paying attention. But for those involved, the air shifted. One officer's hand relaxed at his side. The supervisor paused mid-step, reading the card twice. "You're Senator Reeves," he said quietly, his voice a mixture of surprise and recognition. The officers and staff froze for a moment. Everyone processed the same information at once. The man they had treated as a visitor, as someone to follow procedure with, was not just an ordinary citizen. In this fictional story, he held a position of authority, one that demanded respect, influence, and responsibility. Yet, in that moment, there was no celebration. No dramatic announcement. No raising of voices. No flashing cameras. Instead, Keanu Reeves smiled gently, almost apologetically. "I'm just someone trying to understand how things work," he said softly. His voice carried clarity, calm, and humility. "I wanted to see how rules are followed. I wanted to see how people are treated when no one knows who they are. And I wanted to learn." It was a revelation that could have been shocking, but instead, it was quietly transformative. The officers exchanged glances, understanding the unspoken lesson. This wasn't about authority. It wasn't about status or titles. Leadership, as this fictional story illustrated, could manifest through patience, observation, and integrity. The supervisor nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. No reprimand. No blame. No embarrassment forced upon anyone. It was simply a moment of recognition, that respect and awareness matter more than assumptions and appearances. The bystanders, who had been whispering in curiosity, were equally captivated. They had assumed they were witnessing a minor enforcement incident. Instead, they saw a man of influence who had chosen humility over spectacle, patience over pride, and learning over confrontation. In that brief pause, everyone present had a choice, to see authority as power alone or to recognize the deeper value of character. Keanu Reeves's presence was a reminder that leadership is not only about what you control, but about how you respond when control is uncertain. How you act when you are unrecognized. How you choose patience over reaction. The revelation did not end there. Inside the building, staff who had been unaware of the moment outside reflected on their own routines. Policies, procedures, and protocols are necessary. Yes, but the way they are carried out matters as much as their written form. A simple smile, a calm explanation, a respectful tone, these small acts create a culture of trust. No one needed to be embarrassed. No one needed to feel humiliated. And no one left that morning thinking that authority alone was sufficient to inspire respect. This fictional story teaches that true leadership is quiet. It is measured in patience, in presence, and in the way someone treats others when they believe they have nothing to offer. Keanu Reeves's calm revelation changed a small world in a simple way. It reminded everyone that status can be earned through action, but respect must be given through understanding. As he walked away from the steps, unannounced and unnoticed by the larger public, the officers returned to their duties, carrying a newfound awareness. The crowd dispersed quietly, and the building continued its daily rhythm. The morning had not been dramatic. There were no cameras, no applause, no official press releases. Yet for those who witnessed it, the lesson lingered. Humility, patience, and character can reveal more about leadership than titles ever could. And sometimes, the most surprising revelations come not with a loud announcement, but with quiet observation, a soft smile, and a willingness to let others act first. After the quiet revelation outside the building, life returned to its usual rhythm. Officers went back to their rounds, staff resumed their meetings, and passers-by dispersed into the city streets. On the surface, nothing dramatic had changed. Yet, in the minds of those who had witnessed the morning's events, a subtle transformation had begun. Keanu Reeves, in this fictional story, had chosen to leave without fanfare. He did not linger to bask in recognition, nor did he demand acknowledgement for the lesson his presence had imparted. His influence was quiet, almost invisible, yet undeniably powerful. That quiet authority is often the most difficult to achieve, It is leadership exercised not through control or punishment, but through patience, integrity, and observation. Inside the building, the officers discussed the situation privately. "He could have been upset," one said. "He didn't have to respond the way he did." The other nodded. "Instead, he stayed calm. He didn't push. He didn't argue. He just observed. And in doing so, he taught us something." This fictional story illustrates a truth about human interaction. How we respond to situations where our authority is questioned, or where we are unsure of the circumstances, defines our character more than any title ever could. The officers, trained to enforce rules, realized that respect isn't automatically granted by uniforms, badges, or protocols. Respect is given through understanding, empathy, and integrity, and sometimes the most influential leaders are those who let others act first, quietly, without expectation. Meanwhile, the staff inside the building began to reflect on their own practices. Policies were necessary, yes, but procedures alone are not enough. How often do we enforce rules without considering the human element? How often do we assume authority without listening? This fictional encounter, simple though it was, became a mirror, one that revealed the small ways in which respect and empathy can be overlooked, even in structured systems. For Keanu Reeves, the purpose of the visit had never been about asserting his role or demonstrating power. It had been about observing, learning, and modeling the behavior he hoped others would emulate: patience, humility, and calmness in the face of misunderstanding. He understood that real leadership is not measured in headlines, applause, or immediate recognition. It is measured in the quiet moments where one chooses integrity over ego, empathy over judgment. This fictional story asks a reflective question. How would you have responded if you were in that situation? Would you have insisted on recognition? Would you have demanded apologies? Or would you have allowed the moment to unfold, offering calm and understanding instead of confrontation? The officers, staff, and even the few onlookers learned something valuable. When someone is misjudged, or when assumptions are made based on appearance or circumstance, there is an opportunity. An opportunity not to punish, not to lecture, but to model patience and character. To choose awareness over reaction. To lead without force, and to inspire without demanding attention. Over the following days, subtle changes began to take root in this fictional setting. Training protocols incorporated empathy alongside procedure. Staff discussed ways to balance authority with understanding. Officers reflected on how they approach situations with uncertainty. Small actions, inspired by a quiet moment, had the potential to create lasting impact. This story's moral shift is clear. Leadership and respect are not about titles, power, or position. They are about how you treat others when no one is watching, how you respond when assumptions are made, and how you choose patience and integrity over anger or ego. The man outside the building demonstrated this not through confrontation, but through presence. Not through punishment, but through example. And that is the lesson that lingers. Sometimes, the most effective way to change a system is not through authority, coercion, or force. It is through quiet observation, reflective action, and the patient demonstration of character. It is through showing others what leadership can look like when it is grounded in empathy, humility, and understanding. Have you ever been in a situation where someone misjudged you? How did you respond? Could you have responded with patience instead of defensiveness? Could you have demonstrated the strength of character that inspires respect without demanding it? In this fictional story, Keanu Reeves's calm presence did more than correct a misunderstanding. It reminded everyone present, officers, staff, and onlookers, that respect is earned through integrity, not imposed through authority. It is a quiet, powerful, and enduring form of leadership. And sometimes, that is more impactful than any headline could ever be. The morning that had started quietly outside the government building ended quietly as well. Keanu Reeves, in this fictional story, walked away without a word to the crowd, without seeking acknowledgement or applause. To the casual observer, he might have been just another passerby, blending into the city streets. But for those who had witnessed the subtle drama, the misunderstanding, the calm verification, and the revelation of his presence, the lesson lingered. This fictional story is not about who holds authority or power. It is not about who gets recognition or applause. It is about how we respond to situations when assumptions are made, when status is unknown, and when character is put to the test. The officers, staff, and bystanders had all experienced a gentle awakening. Leadership is quiet, subtle, and often invisible to the casual eye. It is a series of choices, small but deliberate, that define the respect we earn and the example we set. Imagine, for a moment, being in the shoes of the officers. They were performing their duty, following protocol, and acting within the boundaries of the rules they had been trained to enforce. They could not have known who the man truly was, and yet, in a matter of minutes, they found themselves at a crossroads. Do they assert authority with rigid compliance, or do they allow patience, understanding, and empathy to guide their actions? The fictional story demonstrates that choosing empathy does not diminish authority. On the contrary, it amplifies respect. Now imagine being one of the staff inside the building. Routine work continued, meetings progressed, and schedules were maintained. Yet, a moment outside, brief, quiet, and unannounced, had the power to challenge assumptions and inspire reflection. Systems can be perfect on paper, but the human element, how rules are applied, how people are treated, is what truly defines culture. Leadership, in this fictional story, is not about enforcing rules with an iron hand. It is about asking, how can we ensure every person feels respected, seen, and valued? For the audience, the story becomes an invitation to reflect. How often do we judge others before we understand their circumstances? How often do we make assumptions based on appearances, uniforms, or first impressions? And how often do we pause to consider the quiet choices that define our character and influence the people around us? Keanu Reeves's fictional presence in this story is a reminder that leadership does not require grand gestures or dramatic announcements. It does not require confrontation or spectacle. It requires patience, humility, and the willingness to act with integrity even when no one is watching. Leadership is not measured by headlines or accolades, but by the respect we inspire through example. And respect, in turn, is not granted automatically. It is earned through consistent behavior, empathy, and self-awareness. The officers, the staff, and the few witnesses all experienced a subtle shift in perception. The lesson of the morning was not, see who is in charge. The lesson was, observe how character is revealed in ordinary moments, and reflect on how you respond to them. For viewers watching this story unfold, it offers an opportunity for reflection. What does respect mean to you? How do you respond when someone is misjudged, when a misunderstanding occurs, or when you have the chance to model patience and empathy? Could a quiet, deliberate choice, a calm presence, a soft word, or a simple act of understanding create more impact than an immediate, reactive response? Speech Balloon. This fictional story encourages reflection. How do we treat others when no one is watching? Thumbs up if you believe that character and empathy matter more than appearances or authority. Let that guide your actions. Bell subscribe for more inspirational stories about humility, leadership, and the quiet power of integrity. The real power of leadership is subtle. It does not demand attention. It does not create spectacle. It exists in the moments we choose patience over pride, understanding over judgment, and reflection over reaction. And sometimes, that quiet choice, like the one made by Keanu Reeves in this fictional story, has the power to ripple far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Because the most lasting lessons are often learned not in dramatic confrontations, but in calm moments of observation, reflection, and integrity. The morning ended as quietly as it began. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm light across the streets. The building returned to its usual rhythm, staff at their desks, officers on patrol, and pedestrians moving through the city, each absorbed in their own lives. On the surface, nothing had changed. But for those who had witnessed the brief, unusual encounter, the lesson lingered, quietly, like a seed planted in fertile soil. Keanu Reeves, in this fictional story, walked away without fanfare, without seeking acknowledgement, without attempting to control the narrative. He did not demand apologies. He did not issue commands. He did not flaunt his status. Instead, he allowed the moment to exist as it was, a human interaction in its raw, honest form. And in doing so, he taught a lesson that no lecture or policy document could convey. Leadership is often misunderstood. Many believe it is about authority, recognition, or imposing change through control. Yet, as this story illustrates, the most profound leadership is exercised quietly. It is demonstrated in patience when misunderstanding occurs, in empathy when assumptions are made, and in calm reflection when the opportunity arises to act with integrity. Leadership is not performed for the audience. It is lived in moments when no one is watching. For the officers who had followed protocol, the experience became a quiet reflection. They realized that rules and procedures are necessary, but they are not the entirety of leadership. How we apply them, how we treat people in moments of uncertainty, and how we choose to respond, those are the measures that matter. A uniform and a badge may command attention, but character commands respect. For the staff inside the building, the encounter prompted reflection on culture and practice. Policies are only as effective as the humanity behind them. A simple pause, a patient explanation, or a moment of understanding can transform an interaction that might otherwise feel rigid or impersonal. And sometimes, one person's calm presence can inspire change in others simply by modeling empathy, patience, and integrity. And for the few onlookers, and even for the imagined audience watching the story unfold, the lesson is clear. We are all capable of being leaders in small ways. We can choose to act with understanding instead of judgment. We can choose patience instead of reaction. We can choose to observe before we assume, to listen before we respond. In this fictional story, Keanu Reeves's quiet actions created ripples. Not through force or spectacle, but through subtle influence. He reminded everyone present that leadership is not a position or a title. It is the sum of our choices, the reflection of our character, and the respect we show toward others, even when it is not required. And that is perhaps the most important lesson of all. In a world that often equates visibility with influence, the most lasting impact may come from moments that are unseen, unheard, and quietly observed. When we choose empathy over judgment, humility over ego, and understanding over assumption, we are practicing a form of leadership that cannot be replicated by status alone. So, as this story concludes, consider the ways you might exercise quiet leadership in your own life. How do you respond when assumptions are made about you? How do you treat others when they are misunderstood? How do you act when no one is watching? These are the moments that define character, inspire respect, and create lasting influence. Because sometimes, the most powerful revelations are not shouted from the rooftops. They are lived in small, deliberate choices, in patience, in observation, and in integrity. And in those moments, true leadership shines. Speech balloon: what does respect and character mean to you? Thumbs up if you believe empathy and humility are stronger than authority. Carry that lesson forward. Bell subscribe for more inspirational stories about quiet leadership, integrity, and the human power of reflection. And remember, the strongest authority is often silent. The most lasting lessons are often gentle. And the most powerful leaders are those who show us what it means to lead without demanding recognition.